The Socceroos need only to avoid a 5-goal defeat against Saudi Arabia in the early hours of Wednesday morning, and they will have booked their ticket to the World Cup. But with a desperate Saudi Arabia on the other end of the pitch, still alive and with football to be played, there can be no allowances for complacency. We're looking forward. This is a very unique situation, right? And we talked about last week how sometimes football is a little bit different depending on the circumstances that you find yourself in. And when you're a club team, you're playing in a league and it's the start of the season, and if you're in Europe, you've probably got 36, 37 games left to go. It can all be about philosophy and trying to play your way and working on those tactics and imparting your wisdom onto a team and whatever it might be. But the Socceroos now, and of course against Japan last Thursday night, are in a very specific scenario where they just have to avoid defeat by 5 goals. However, I can't imagine that's too much of the terminology that Tony Popovic will actually be using when he's been giving his team talks this week.
He might use the just don't lose, but the whole 5 goals thing makes it a little bit arbitrary. But no, it's a strange situation to be in, because, I mean, after it almost did kind of feel like, okay, the job's done. You know, the Socceroos have qualified after that 1-0 win over Japan. But 5 goals, it's a lot. It's a lot to have to concede to Saudi Arabia without responding as well. But there's still a part where it's like we've seen Australian teams do silly things in matches that they should win before. And, you know, you can't help but think a little bit about that sometimes and go, maybe it's not going to be as easy as possible. But look, I think that Popovic will be pretty happy with the position they found themselves in, considering what it could have been coming into this match had they not got the job done against Japan. You know, there would have been at least part of him that would have had the possibility of this being a do or die game for his side coming into this window. The fact that it's not is probably, you know, a best case scenario for him. So yeah, there's still something to play for, of course, but I don't think that, you know, there needs to be too much stress or anxiety attached to this game. Okay, you can't go out there and be silly and make mistakes and things like that. But I think that the way they played against Japan showed that even in, you know, a really high stakes situation against really good opposition, they don't make those mistakes. So, you know, I think there's definitely an air of confidence. And like I said, it seemed like the coaching staff, the players, the fans, the media, everyone seems to be around the fact that qualification is all but guaranteed at this point in time.
Mm-hmm. It's fascinating because that's obviously the general sentiment of the public and probably the people on the outside of the team. And the numbers in that scenario are very much in favour of the Socceroos. They've only conceded 6 goals during this qualifying phase. And remember that included a loss under Graham Arnold before Tony Popovic came in. They haven't lost a game since Tony has come under the helm of the team. Saudi Arabia, meanwhile, have only scored 6 goals in this entire phase of 9 matches. So they'd have to almost double that tally in just one game. But again, they're also coming into this knowing that they do have to do that. So the way that they set up will probably look a little bit different. But despite all those numbers and despite the fact that the head-to-head record against Saudi Arabia does look quite favourable as well, what we've been hearing from the players that have been doing press throughout the week is that straight away, once they saw that result of Saudi Arabia win over Bahrain 2-0, they knew that there was still going to be something on the line going into this one. So I'm sure Popovic has been that kind of coach to really just say it's not guaranteed. We still got to go in and put in a really good shift. And at the end of the day, even if a lot of these players do think they're qualified for a World Cup, well, then individually they're going to want to make sure that they're on that plane as well. Yeah. So there's still plenty to prove.
Oh, 100%. And I mean, we've seen some comments, I can't remember which player it was now, in one of the press conferences saying that, you know, he's expecting it to be a difficult trip, you know, and he's expecting
Conor Metcalfe,
Conor Metcalfe, and he's like expecting delays with transport, and he's expecting it to be a hostile atmosphere and stuff like that. So yeah, look, they're under no false pretenses when it comes to what's at stake for this game, because like I said, it's not impossible to concede 5 goals. So you know, there's definitely a lot at play here, and it is crazy that it is, because it does, like you said, the general public sentiment is this kind of feels like a dead rubber, like it's just, there's nothing really here. And, you know, yeah, Saudi Arabia, they got a 2-0 win over Bahrain, but anybody who's actually watched that game or watched the highlights will see that Bahrain probably could have actually taken a point from them with the way that they played. Like, there's just a feeling around the place that this should be as easy as said as it is done. So yeah, look, we're all hopeful for it, but I think it's the right move, obviously, that the players and the coaches, they're able to celebrate that moment against Japan, but also stay focused on the fact that they do still have to actually secure this qualification spot, because otherwise they'll have to go through, the fourth round of qualifying, which would just be unnecessary drama to add on to it all, and make things prohibitively more difficult for the side to actually qualify for the World Cup. So yeah, look, everybody will be out there with a point to prove. Both teams, Australia, we'll just be in it to make sure they get through. Saudi Arabia will be in it to try and get that result. So yeah, it's not going to be, I don't think it'll be a boring match, maybe not as I hate to say it, but the Japan match was quite boring.
It was, until the 88th minute.
yeah, I don't think it'll be as bad as that game was, because Saudi Arabia have a lot to do, and I'm expecting them to put up a big fight for it. So it should be quite an entertaining match. But yeah, it seems like both sides are acutely aware of what's at stake here, and it doesn't seem like Saudi Arabia are going to back down from the challenge either. So yeah, it could be a fun watch.
I wonder, obviously it's worth asking the question, if you're Tony Popovic, do you go there just to park the bus, just to soak in pressure? The easy answer for me is no. It doesn't seem like he's the kind of person that would do that. And also, just by nature of how Tony wants to set his sides up, they're going to be quite resilient defensively, just as a byproduct of the way he wants to play football. And obviously the mentality, and we heard this, I think it was Aidan O'Neill who was speaking to Joey Lynch, who's travelling over there in Saudi Arabia, is that they're going out to beat them, which seems like obviously it's a good mentality. If you have these games, saying like a European tie that a lot of the scenarios we're probably familiar with, if you're up 1-0 and you go in there to defend, well, then as soon as you concede a goal, it's okay. Well, then you've kind of lost that edge, and the way you set your team up, it doesn't work anymore in this scenario. Yeah. But 5 goals is very different. But even then, it still feels like they're pushing this mentality of, we want to go prove ourselves even more. We want to go step our foot on the throats of this Asian opposition that's really tested us in this last, few years, really going back to probably the Asian Cup. And it's funny because Australia has these amazing records of the most consecutive wins in a World Cup qualifying group, obviously being the second phase with all these kind of lower ranked nations. But traditionally we have struggled, and we've seen that going into these playoffs in the last few cycles. So it's also an opportunity to break that mindset. And then obviously to the tactical point as well, do you imagine any world where Popovic is changing up and parking the bus at all?
Yeah, I don't really see it, to be honest. I think what we will see, hopefully, is a bit of a refinement of their in-possession play, which I think was stunted a little bit against Japan just because they knew they had to get the job done. And so, a couple of things were a little bit rushed, and, things weren't quite working. And obviously Japan played very well, and their press was very effective, especially in the middle third, to really disrupt that flow that Australia tried to get going. But I think we will see them starting to hit those strides and get into the groove a little bit more in this one. Hopefully, that's what I'm hoping for. And I do think that with the way that Saudi Arabia play, those spaces will open up a little bit more. And, the likes of, he came off the bench and was a big part of it, but McGree, he could come in and have a really good game in this one, I think. So, yeah, I'm with you. I don't really see him going and properly, yes, he sets up with a 5 at the back, but it's usually 3 at the back for the most part, with those 2 wing backs getting quite high. I don't see him, instructing those guys to stay deep and having a proper 5 at the back or anything like that. We know that Popovic is a defence-first coach. That's sort of always been one of his principles, is to build from the back, but it doesn't necessarily mean that he's going to park the bus every opportunity he gets. And I think it would be foolish to do that, because you're going to invite the pressure and you're going to be giving Saudi Arabia the ball, and that's what they want. They want the ball, they want the possession, and they want to be keeping Australia pinned back as far as possible, because they need to score 5 goals, and that's one of the easiest ways to do it, is to just keep that pressure up. So yeah, I think it would be a little bit of a mistake to go in with that mindset and to change things up when they've worked so well throughout this whole qualification period under Popovic since he's come in, with this back 5, with it being slightly more aggressive. It's worked wonders for them, it just seems a little bit strange to go in and change it up. So I'm not expecting that. And what I actually, I think they might view this game as is not a friendly, but a competitive fixture where there's a lot at stake, but again, it's 5 goals.
Yeah.
So there can be a little bit of experimentation in there, and they can try some new things and just see what works and what doesn't. I know that they've got this nice baseline with how they like to play with those inverted wingers and those wing backs getting high and stuff like that, and the double pivot midfield. Like, you've got that as your base. What are some things you can do to play around with that and change things up depending on the opposition and the players you've got available and things like that? I think this could be a really good opportunity, because in friendlies, the problem that you get, and the problem that we always hear with international friendlies, is that there's nothing at stake, so neither team's really trying all that hard. But in this one, there is something at stake, and Saudi Arabia will be trying to score those 5 goals, but it is quite a big task to get those 5. So there is still that room to be able to do a little bit, knowing that there's not as much pressure on you. So yeah, I think that it could be interesting from that regard, and just small little tweaks maybe to roles or specific players he puts in different positions and things like that, just to try and see what works, to give him some variation and some options moving forwards, because it's been very static in the way that he's set about things so far, Popovic.
Yeah.
And like I said, it's worked, and that's tremendous. But I think moving forwards, you're going to have players out injured. You're going to have players, in and out of the squad. You're going to have new players coming through who might not suit specific roles and things like that. You need to be able to have those, variations that you can call upon if you need it. And I think that this could be a good opportunity to at least try and see what works, and and give it a shot.
So on the individuals then, first of all, we should say a congratulations to Matthew Ryan, who, if he does take the field on Wednesday morning, it will be his 100th cap for the national team, which is quite an extraordinary achievement to be, the steward of the national team and, of course, the captain for so long. So he's in line for making history. Obviously, your talk of rotation potentially could suggest he might not even play this game. Obviously, he and Joe Gauci have been kind of going back and forth. And the last few windows, of course, being international football, saying the last few windows spans back almost 8 or 9 months now. So things can change very quickly, as they do in football. But obviously, if you were considering, and I agree with you, right, 5 goals feels like enough, where you'd be willing to make a few rotations to test some players in truly competitive games of football. Yeah. Joe Gauci, I think, is an obvious one where you would consider. I'd love to see Kai Truin thrown in defence as part of that back three. I think Chikati would still love to see him start somewhere maybe in the middle or off the left. But then again, Jason Gary, I thought, did really well. He obviously played that pinpoint diagonal pass in through McGree to create that goal as well. So he's another name. You've got the likes of Riley McGree, who I think his fitness was a slight issue, which is why he only played a half of football. But then again, you likes of Adam Taggart, who playing for Perth Glory this season, we probably haven't seen him have the opportunity to prove himself. Yeah. So he's an interesting name. And then the likes of course, a Daniel Azzani and a Marco Tilio, who didn't appear in the last Socceroos game, but had a really good closeout to the A-League season. So I think for me, those are a few names where Popovic might consider throwing them in. And similar to the way that we were talking about this Japanese team that played Australia, sure, the names might not be the perfect select 11 of if they were putting out their full strength side, but of the names you put out, there's no doubt that the mentality will be to go out and win that game.
Oh, 100%. There's a clear mentality. Really, since Popper came in, of trying to change the way that the team looks at games and the way that they approach things, and I think obviously it's been a success so far, so it's good to see that all the players seem to still be fully focused on this one, and like you said, regardless of who plays, you'll either have players in there that have been here throughout the qualification cycle and have worked hard to get to this point and will revel in being able to have played that whole way through and have some fun in this final game. You'll have those who might be new selections or those who haven't had many minutes who come in and try and vindicate themselves in their selections and try and prove a point. So I think there's something to play for each individual, and one that I'd really like to see start is Riley McGree, because yes, he might not be full fitness, but if you need to take him off at halftime, do it. But I think that he's the sort of player that, and we saw it against Japan, he just breaks the game open, and I think that if Australia can get a goal, that's pretty much game over. As far as I'm concerned, Saudi Arabia will then need to get 6. that's an even bigger ask. And I just think that one goal for Australia could kill the game off. And I think that if you're starting McGree, you put yourself on the front foot in that regard and give yourself a good chance to do that, in the first 20-30 minutes. And that's, by buys, you can take him off at half time, keep his minutes down, and then you can bring somebody else on for the second half, give some minutes to a youngster or something like that, and have some fun with it. So yeah, look, it's there's a lot of really cool things that could be done here. I agree, Chikati should start again. I know that obviously he should be a starting 11 pick every time he's fit, but it's a case of also making sure that he's getting minutes still, because he's obviously just come back from injury, hasn't had a lot of time since then. So I think it's important in this sort of stage of his, I suppose, recovery or his return to football to be getting these good minutes in. So and obviously he was, the whole back line was amazing against Japan, but I think he was probably the standout. So it would be good to see him coming back in. And I don't know, maybe crazy one, but Boss, does he get minutes in this one? Where maybe you just think, Bajic, you did your job. Your job was to be that veteran presence against Japan. He obviously ended up getting that goal. Is it a case of we'll reward you with a little bit of time off, and you don't have to run yourself ragged for another 90 minutes? It could be an interesting discussion to have. And obviously Boss was chosen for a reason, and let's see that reason, right? Let's see him prove himself out there on the pitch. I think that would be quite entertaining. I'm sure there would be some who would disagree with me on that and would rather not see that, but I just think if you've picked him, give him some minutes, let him show what he's got.
Yeah, well, the ever-rising profile of Casey Boss, Joey Lynch is reporting that for ESPN that he could be near a move to the Bundesliga to play for FSV Mainz, which would be really just cap off an amazing 12 months for him, keeping Adama Traore out of the A-League team for Melbourne Victory, and obviously a national call-up, and then potentially a transfer to a top 5 European league. That'd be some year for the 21-year-old. Of course, whoever loses not just this game but this battle for second place will have to go through the trials of the fourth round of AFC qualifying. In case you weren't aware, there are 5 total stages, which has to be one of the most convoluted qualifying processes for the World Cup around the world. Of course, we start with, in the first round, some of the lower-ranked Asian teams playing a home and away leg, and if you lose that, you're out. You're gone from the World Cup, so it really can be quite brutal. But so the fourth round of qualifying, so either Australia or Saudi Arabia, I think maybe Indonesia has a sneaky chance of being in third as well, will join the other third and fourth place getters from all 3 groups in this phase of qualifying. They will then be split into 2 groups of 3, where there will be a single round robin in a centralised location where those 2 group winners will go off to the World Cup. And then second in those groups go to the 5th round, which is simply just a playoff. And then that team will then qualify for the World Cup playoff tournament, in which an AFC team will likely, depending on seeding, have to win twice to qualify for the World Cup. So of all the trials and tribulations that extended rounds of qualifying have thrown on Australians, this would be the most painstaking of them all, and is something we absolutely want to avoid. And to be fair, when we lost, gained 1 point from that first window before Graham Arnold tendered his resignation, it was looking a little bit nervy at that point. So it's good to kind of sit back and know that a lot of people have said for the first time in a while we've been able to go into the last game and not worry. Obviously, there's that, I think, 0.3% chance. I saw someone trying to attribute a number to it that we'll miss out, but it feels pretty good, and that's a nice feeling.
Yeah, like this extra stage is just, it's insane. It's ridiculous. It's crazy. Like, it's just everything about it just makes it makes me hate football. Because football is just such a stupid sport in that regard, that you have things like this that pop up from time to time, and especially now with extended World Cup and things like that, it doesn't make things easy when you're trying to pick which teams to go. And hopefully that the AFC can refine this as the years go on, and make things, we don't want to make it easy for teams to qualify. Obviously, we want the best teams going through, but I think this is a little bit convoluted to then go into what's essentially a second group stage, and then if you still don't winning that, you then still get another chance. It's just like, there's just way too much going on. And like you said, it would be it would be an absolute horror for Australia to have to go through, and for us to try and understand, and the general public to try and understand as well. So for that reason, hopefully they can avoid shipping a ton of goals to Saudi Arabia. And that 0.3%, I did see that number floating around today. I don't know. We've got to get WinViz on it or something and see what that says. But it can't be a particularly big number. So there is sort of that confidence that, we will qualify through this stage and avoid having to run the gauntlet again in this fourth round of qualifying, which is just, that's an insane sentence to say, 4 rounds of qualification.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. And then, technically the fifth with the playoff. They just, they love making these things.